Hey, look at this. It's something else your smartphone made irrelevant. We'll take a look at this and some other items next. Tech Throwback starts now. Hello and welcome to another edition of Tech Throwback, the program that brings you the techno trends from way back when. I'm your host, Bill Robert, and today we'll take a look at some computing devices, one for the lap and one for the hand. But first, before we get to that, you sank my Battleship electronically. It's today's way back playback. If you're my age or kind of close to my age, you might remember a game called Battleship. We used to play it a lot when we were kids, and basically, a really simple game. Consisted of two little plastic, little fold-up thingies, and inside you had pegs and you had ships, and you put your pegs and you put your ships in different positions, and you had to guess where the other guy's ships were to try and hit all his stuff before he hit all of yours. That was the basic Battleship game. And after a while, Battleship sold well, but the minds of Milton Bradley probably thought, gee, I wonder if we can make this even cooler for today's kids. And this was back like in the late 70s. Nowadays, they have all types of different permutations. But back then, they're like, gee, what can we do to kind of make this game evolve and make it cooler for kids of this day and age? Well, they came out with this game right here, Electronic Battleship. And before we set this puppy up, let's take a look at the Tech Throwback white paper. Electronic Battleship was released in 1977 by MB Electronics, which was a Milton Bradley company. The retail price at the start was $39.99. Later it dropped a little bit, I believe, to $29.99. The original 1977 release operated using two 9-volt batteries. Over the years, they changed out the circuit board a little bit. They performed some tweaks to the design in 1982. Among the changes, instead of the 9-volt now, it ran on 4 AA batteries. They also changed some of the sound, and there were some minor changes with some of the programming interfaces. So here we go. Start with opening the box. And the first thing that comes out here is the game deck, like so. Then you have the parts. The parts didn't come this way, by the way, obviously. This was after the fact. This is kind of an aftermarket tweak, if you will. And then here is the overbridge. So you basically just pop that right on here. And then you had your pieces. You had your white pegs, which were for misses, your red pegs, which were for hits, and then you had all your ships. So what you would do is you would take your 5 ships, and you had the carrier here. This was your battleship, so you had that here. And then what else did you have? You had a cruiser. You had, I believe, a troop carrier, and then you had the little tiny PT boat, too. So just, here's the little carrier, the little cruiser right there. You had the PT boat, and then actually you had a submarine, too. So there you go. So the 5 ships there. So you had your PT boat, your submarine, and all that other stuff. So let's just turn that over here so the camera over here can get it. Now, this was the board where you had your pieces. This is where you marked everything that you guessed on the other side. So if you guessed, say, for instance, D5, and there was nothing in D5, you would take a white peg and put it in D5, and you would just keep hitting random ports until you hit something, in which case you could take the ship out. Now, the standard Battleship game works the same way as Electronic Battleship, but here's the thing where the Electronic Battleship, you have to program it first. Now, as far as the interface goes, you had the buttons here, and you also had a switch. So on this side, you actually had the on-off switch. And then on this side, this was load and go. So if the switch was in load position, you would program in your coordinates for your ships. If it was in go, you'd be ready to play. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to turn this on. There we go. The scintillating sound of simulated sonar. Try saying that one 5 times fast. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into load mode. So I take this switch over here. I switch it from go into load. And now I'm loading in my coordinates. So I'm going to go by the ships I've placed right here. So I'm going to start with the PT boat, which is B5 and B6. So what you want to do first is B5 and B6. So you slide this over to B, and then B5, and then there you go. There you go, B5, B6, loaded in. So the submarine next is in D5, 6, and 7. So we move this over to D, and then 5, 6, 7. And you hit, basically you hit the red key to enter. And when you hear the tone, that's basically your confirmation that everything worked in. Now next we'll enter in the carrier, which is actually E2 through I2. So we'll go E2. So we go E2, F, G, H, I. There we go. So that's entered in. So we still have a couple of others. We then have, starting at F6 for the Battleship. Okay, here we go. F6. 7, whoops, nope. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll go F6, F7. I'll change this around a little bit then because I screwed up. So F6, F7, F8, and F9. And then finally the cruiser, which we'll put on I, 6, 7, and 8. So we'll go I, 6, and 8. Okay, everything's entered. Now we can switch into go mode. I'm not even going to bother entering ships on this side, but I will turn around here to basically show you here. This is set. And now what you want to do is you want to try and make the guess, and once again, this is like regular Battleship, but instead of just saying B5 or C3 or whatever, you actually go in. So let's say, for instance, let's go C3 first because we know there's nothing there. So we'll go C3, fire, nothing. Okay, now let's go someplace where we know there's a ship. Let's hit the carrier on E2. So we'll go to E here, 2 here, E2. There you go, lights up, boom. That means they hit one of your ships. So now they can, now that they've got that, what you would do is you had to hit on E2, so you would mark it here, E2. This is remarkably like the original version of Battleship. You just have all the extra button play. In fact, the interesting thing about electronic Battleship is, unlike many other electronic games, you could actually play Battleship on an electronic Battleship set without turning the electronics on at all. All the electronics are extra bells and whistles, but obviously they are pretty cool too. For instance, so it had that little extra added thing. And it was 1979, I was, what, 12, 13, and I'm like, oh, that's cool! So kids like me bought this stuff up, and Milton Bradley had another hit with a game that already had a huge hit with. So anyway, they came out with different versions after this too. In 1989, they came out with an electronic talking Battleship. And once again, it's still the case with any permutation of Battleship. As long as you've got the pegs and the ships and everything here, you don't even have to turn the game on. In fact, once again, you can just go back to your stock version of Battleship, just open up the little tiny clamshell things and just go from there. But nonetheless, there we go. It was a fun game then. It's still pretty fun to play around with now. That's a Milton Bradley's electronic Battleship. Coming up next, we're going to go to a laptop from the Tandy Corporation. It was actually a little rare one, only was out for a couple of years, but nonetheless, it's today's senior system. Once upon a time, the Tandy Corporation billed themselves as the biggest name in little computers, and they put a lot, some with good response, some not so many. One of the most popular ones, obviously, was the Model 100 series, which became kind of a standard for journalists, especially since they had the nice built-in modem where you just basically plug right into your phone line, type everything out, and then just fire it right off to your city desk or your editing desk or your assignment desk or whatever. So that was a big product for them. A few others, too. Obviously, you know I'm a big fan of the Color Computer series. This is one that didn't last too long. Only lasted a couple of years. It was the Tandy 1100 FD, and there are actually two of these computers. There was the 1100 FD, which had just the lone floppy disk on the side, and then there was the 1100 HD, which had an internal hard drive. Before we get into the specifics of the FD, let's take a look at the Tech Throwback white paper. The Tandy Corporation launched the 1100 FD in 1989, and it was sold through the Radio Shack stores as well as the Radio Shack computer centers. It was originally sold for $9.99. In the 1991 catalog, they actually reduced the price to $7.99. The system was based on the NEC V20 processor running at about 8 megahertz. Now, the operating system, this was interesting because it was running a version of MS-DOS. It was MS-DOS 3.3, but instead of needing to bring it in off a disk or a hard drive, it was installed in ROM, which means super fast boot times. We'll show you that in a second. The unit was equipped with 640K of RAM, and it also had one internal floppy disk drive. So if you wanted to run programs off the drive but then save data, you had to swap disks back and forth out of the drive. Unless, of course, you had the 1100 HD, which had an internal hard disk drive. So obviously you see here it's a pretty small design, pretty sleek too, actually. Not many things on the back though. It basically has 2 spots in the back, and we'll show it to you right here. The only 2 connections you had, one was for a parallel port, the other was for serial. You would obviously use the parallel port to connect to a printer. There were external floppy drives sold for this unit which connected through the serial connector, so you could indeed have this with an external floppy drive as well as the internal one here, which you could go back and forth if you had different programs. And so you close that up, and you notice there's another little compartment here, and this one is actually kind of tough to open, which is good. This is where the battery resides, and it's just a standard one of those standard rechargeable laptop batteries of the day, and it just popped in right up top here. Clamshell design. On this side you had the floppy drive, and on this side you basically had the jack for the power and also your on-off switch. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect the power. Power supply is here, just your standard average DC wall wart, so that just pops right in here. And then, oh look, there's an extension cord on my knee. How did I know how to have that handy, right? Okay, so we plug it in. So the unit has power, so now what we're going to do is open this up and basically turn it on. You hit the button here, just slide it, and off. There you go. Now you've got the button on the side. Now I was mentioning that MS-DOS is in ROM. Watch how fast this thing boots. And you're into your desktop. Now the desktop was running a proprietary piece of software that Tandy wrote for a lot of their computers called DeskMate. In this case what it did was it booted to DeskMate right off of what was in ROM. But if you wanted to run most of the programs, you actually had to have the program floppy in the drive so that it could access the rest of the data. You also had a control here where you could actually change the screen as far as the contrast. But you had your different things here, and now there's no mouse with this. You actually have to basically go back and forth. You tab between the different fields here. So basically you have your calendar here, then you have different, have your address, your calendar, your PC link. So basically this has links to all your different programs right here. What we're going to do right now is go back to a program called Text. And Text is basically a very simple word processor. So all you would do here is type in hello, this is Tech Throwback. See that? So obviously you could type everything in, and then once you were done you just saved it to the floppy. Text was one of the only components of DeskMate that resided right in ROM, and that was handy. They probably thought since you're going to need to save your data to a floppy anyway, it was a good idea to have that just come up right off ROM. A lot of the other stuff, be it the calendar, something that's a little more data intensive, they want you to put in the diskette for it. So, but once again, your desktop is a really simple system, and here's the other thing about this too. As fast as it turns on, it also turns on off that fast too. It's not like, in this day and age with Windows where you've got to shut it down and then you've got to and at least it shuts down now by itself. Remember back in the days of Windows 95, it is now safe to shut off your computer. Well, in this case, the way you shut this off basically was you hit the button, gone. It was off. You didn't have to worry about making sure it shut down properly. You didn't have to worry about the disk being corrupted or anything getting blown. Everything was in ROM, so therefore you just basically took it. It was on, it was off, fast on, fast off, and it's a really simple setup. Now, I mentioned this was a short-lived unit. This was actually only around for a couple of years. Before Tandy even launched this computer, they had another laptop called the 1400 FD. And basically, the 1400 FD had dual disk drives right in here. Or you can actually have, I think there was an HD version too, where you had maybe a floppy and you had a drive. But you also already had multiple drives, so you didn't have to do all the flopping stuff. So this was kind of a step backward for Tandy. But if you're looking for just a basic small computer, this is not a bad one to have. Obviously, the biggest thing is there's no internal modem connection, so if you wanted a modem, you'd have to connect through the serial port in the back to some kind of serial modem. One of the nice things about this is a really good keyboard. This really feels nice. I mean, nowadays you get a lot of the chiclet keyboards, and a lot of the keyboards nowadays, especially in laptops, they're just, I don't know, they're just kind of either a flimsiness or just a not as substantial feel to them. But that's a nice clackety-clack you get from these keys. If you're looking for, at the time, if you were looking for just a simple thing, maybe do some documents, do some basic productivity, and not do much else with it, this is probably a great unit for you to have. If you wanted something and you were a little more intense with data usage and things like that, you probably already had one of the 1400 series or one of the other small computers that Tandy or one of its competitors was putting out at the time. And by the way, when you were all done with it, once again, it just clamshells back up, carries away, fits in either, you can carry it under your arm, or most people had bags for them. In fact, I have a pretty nice bag for this one too. So you do your stuff, get your stuff saved, pack it up, fold it up, go away, and go about your business. And that's the Tandy 1100 FD laptop computer. One of the early entries in the laptop field, and once again, a short-lived one in the Tandy pantheon, but there you go. Speaking of short-lived units, we have another one that was actually not Palm, but PalmOne, which was kind of a company that rose out of the ashes of Palm. It's the PalmOne Lifedrive. It's our piece of handy tech. Remember the PDA? A lot of you probably don't. It's what people used to use as kind of their electronic address books back before the advent of the smartphone. I mean, once BlackBerry started coming around, and then the iPhone especially, these things kind of went by the wayside. But for a while, there was a pretty thriving PDA market. You had Palm, which was one of the big competitors, obviously. HP had some of their own. Compaq had the iPac series. And there were a number of different, I remember Apple had the Newton, which they tried for a while. And then the ZPDA, the Zoomer, Tandy tried that one. So a lot of places tried to get on the bandwagon, but it didn't really, it went to a point, but then basically smartphones came out and supplanted the whole market. And so now PDAs are just kind of either an odd curiosity or something you see in People magazine whenever celebrities get cozy in public. Oh, look at a PDA. So basically, if a celebrity really loved his device, you could say he was in a PDA, he's showing a PDA to his PDA. I don't know, but anyway. Well off the track here, Captain Tangent strikes again. This is our piece of handy tech here, and this is the PalmOne Lifedrive. Now, this is an interesting device as far as the build quality. At the time, a lot of the devices were getting smaller and skinnier and thinner, and they actually went against type and built something that was really thicker. And this is really kind of a robust unit. But people kind of had issues with the weight. They thought it was kind of almost a paperweight to have in your pocket. But if you look inside, this is a pretty cool device. And we are going to look inside it, but first, let's take a look at the Tech Throwback white paper. The PalmOne Lifedrive was released in 2005 by PalmOne. It was a spin-off of the original Palm company. Once Palm got bought out, a bunch of the founders went and founded their own company, which at the time was PalmOne. The retail price of the device when it came out was $499, and at the time they were billing it as more of a mobile manager than a personal digital assistant. The display was a 320 by 480. It was color. It had 4 gigabyte storage capacity. Now, the interesting thing is it wasn't using flash memory here. It actually used a Hitachi micro drive, and this is important. It featured both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity, which was a first for the company. The Intel CPU on board ran at 416 megahertz, but the price and speed hurt it in the market. As a result, it was only around for a couple of years, discontinued in 2007. Now, one of the interesting things about this device is the main storage unit. I mean, a lot of PDAs, they had like internal flash storage, or you could add either like a compact flash card or an SD card or one of those. This actually had an internal drive, and it was compact flash form factor, but it was a micro drive. Now, if you hadn't heard of the micro drive, this is something the Hitachi came out with. They have actually in here. This is a Hitachi micro drive. IBM also came out with a micro drive, and what it was actually a little tiny hard disk drive that was in like a CF2 form factor. So basically the size of a Type 2 wider compact flash card, but it had a little tiny spinning drive in it, which was pretty interesting for the time. And by the way, it's still running now. But in addition to that, you also had an SD card slot in the top where you can pop in an SD card if you wanted to get more storage as well. So this is your home menu. You've got your different options. You've got photos and videos, office documents, music, also camera companion. You can actually plug in a camera to this, email, web calendar, a lot of your standard organizational stuff for PDAs at the time. Some PDAs were more touch sensitive. Some actually had a stylus that you either had to carry around in your pocket, but a lot of them, like the HP models, had little cubbies that you could slide the stylus. Palm had the same thing. In fact, this one here, it's a nice little kind of push button stylus where it's a locking push button. We put it in and then do that, and then boom, pops up. There you go. Now you have, and it's back on the screen here because I spent so much time talking about the bloody stylus that the thing timed out here. You had options like photos and videos, office documents. You could do spreadsheets and also text documents and things like that. You had music, camera companion, email, web calendar, contacts, all that stuff. Now we'll go to photos and videos for a sec because you could actually play videos right out of this. There we go. We got some video going there. Pretty smooth. A lot of times with PDAs of this particular vintage, when you went to try and play a video, it was very laggy or it just was pixelated, not looking very good. But in this case, this is a really nice look for the video. Obviously, with one of the problems being, obviously, this is 320 by 480. Theoretically, if you're talking video, it should be 480 by 320. Don't get me started on vertical video, please. Do not let me get started. So you had your keys here. In addition to having the stuff you had from the screen, you also had your keys there. You had your home key. You had your File Explorer key right here. And then you had your favorites key. So you had a whole ton of stuff here that you could put in. Now, the interesting thing about this, as I mentioned, it has a little bit more heft to it. It was a little thicker than the other products of the time, but the screen holds up pretty well, even in daylight. I tried this outside and the screen holds up pretty well. You have a number of different options here. As you see here, let's just go back to the home screen for a second there. Now you could either use the stylus or you had your selector here as well. And you had a number of different keys you could go through too. World clock, SMS, you could actually do texting off of this as well. Voice memo, you could record notes to yourself. And this is pretty much standard fare for a lot of PDAs, but they tried to build this, once again, not just as a PDA, as a mobile manager. They call it the Lifedrive, and they really wanted to get people to more or less be really dependent on these things. But the problem was at the time, between the speed and some say there were battery problems too, and just like I said, this is a little bit of a heavier piece. So this didn't fly a lot with a lot of people. So as a result, it was only around for a couple of years and pretty much went down in 2007. And PalmOne didn't last too much longer than that. Now, when you look at the name, and obviously you've seen it in the graphics here, it's PalmOne. It's one word, and it's kind of semi-camel case where it's Palm, like the lowercase Palm, P-A-L-M, and then capital O and then N-E. But a lot of times it's just PalmOne, or some people say PalmOs. Like remember the Own Eaters from the that thing you do. So once again, it's got a nice screen, it's very readable, has a lot of things going for it, but as far as the size and the weight, it just really wasn't where people were at that particular point in time. So people didn't buy it, and after a couple of years, PalmOne didn't produce it. So there we go. That's the PalmOne Lifedrive. Nice little unit, but once again, sometimes even a good idea doesn't catch the public's imagination, doesn't catch their fancy, and this is one of those occasions. And that's another look at the way we used to compute and play back in the day. And that'll do it for this edition of Tech Throwback. I'm Bill Robert, thanking you for tuning in. And don't forget, we'll be back with another episode, more stuff that's cool and old school. Till then, have a great one. Thanks for tuning in.